Welcome to our explainer. Today, we are diving into what is, without a doubt, one of the most intense chapters in the entire Bible, Revelation 19. And we're going to look at it through a very specific lens, a completely literal interpretation of its prophecies.
So before we even get into the weeds of chapter 19, we have to tackle a huge question that really shapes everything else. How are we supposed to read these ancient prophecies? Are they just, symbolic poetry, or are they a literal, play-by-play roadmap of what's to come?
Well, the interpretation we're looking at today goes all in on that second option, a super strict, literal reading. And what's fascinating is that it's presented not just as, hey, this is what we believe, but more like a test, a way to check if we're on the right track as events unfold in the real world. And that really brings us to our first big idea here, the method of interpretation. Well, it's everything. It's the glasses you put on that change how you see the entire picture.
So according to this view, as things start happening in the world, especially events centered around, say, the city of Babylon, we should be able to hold them up against these prophecies. And if they match up literally, well, that's the proof in the pudding. It's like a real-time fact check for an ancient book.
And this idea of looking for patterns is absolutely key. Because as we're about to see, one of the most incredible divine events described here is actually modeled on a very human, very ancient ceremony.
Okay, so let's get into the first major event in Revelation 19. And right off the bat, we're talking about a feast. But here's the twist. There are actually two very, very different suppers mentioned in this one chapter.
So the first one is called the Marriage Supper of the Lamb. And the source material explains this as basically the grand finale of a cosmic love story. But to really get what's going on, you have to understand the blueprint it's built on, which is the ancient Jewish wedding ceremony.
And this is where it gets really interesting. This interpretation takes this ancient wedding pattern and maps it, step for step, onto the relationship between Christ and the church. Every single part of the wedding, the contract, the groom leaving, the wait, is seen as a direct prophetic parallel. But then there's a crucial question. Who exactly is the bride? Well, this interpretation makes a very sharp distinction. The church, it says, is the bride, the one who is betrothed. This is set in direct contrast to Israel, who is often described in the Old Testament as the wife of God, but one who was, in a sense, divorced.
So here you have it. Two suppers, side by side in the same chapter. One is this incredible, joyful wedding celebration for the saints. The other? It's a feast of pure carnage for the birds of the air. The point being made here is pretty stark. You really, really don't want to get your invitations mixed up.
And it's that second supper, that grisly feast of judgment, that really sets the stage for the absolute centerpiece of this chapter, the return of the king. Now, according to this interpretation, this second coming is radically different from the first. Remember, the first time he came as a humble servant. This time, he returns as a conquering king. The source points to a specific prophecy from Isaiah. The first time around, he read the part about good tidings and then he stopped, right at the comma. He left the next phrase unread, the day of vengeance of our God. The argument is, he's coming back to finish the sentence.
And the description of this returning king is just intense. We're talking eyes like fire, many crowns on his head, a name that is the Word of God, and a robe dipped in blood. This is not the gentle shepherd. This is a figure of absolute terrifying power and authority.
So, about that robe dipped in blood, the interpretation we're following links this directly to a quote from Isaiah 63. And it makes a critical point. This isn't his own blood from the crucifixion. No, this is the blood of his enemies. The imagery is of him treading a winepress of God's fury, completely alone. So all of this, the returning king, the robe dipped in blood, it all leads to this, the ultimate climax, the final, long-awaited showdown between all the armies of the world and this one returning king.
And think about the sheer nerve of this moment. You have the armies of the world, led by this figure called the Beast, gathering together to literally wage war on God. I mean, the source we're looking at calls this out for what it is, just an act of complete, unimaginable, insane arrogance.
But here's the thing, this isn't a battle. Not really. There's no back and forth, no struggle. It says the battle is over basically before it even begins. It's not a fight, it's an execution. His enemies are destroyed simply by the sharp sword that comes from his mouth, his word.
So what happens to everyone? Well, the rank-and-file armies are just slain. But their leaders, the two main antagonists, the beast and the false prophet, they don't just die. They're captured. They get a very different, very specific judgment.
And that judgment is to be cast alive into a place called the lake of fire. Now, the source is really specific here. This isn't annihilation, like they just cease to exist. It's described as a state of eternal, conscious punishment.
Okay, so the battle is over. The bad guys are judged. The king is victorious. What happens next? Where does the prophetic timeline go from here, according to this literal view?
The very next thing that happens is the start of what's called the millennium, a literal 1,000-year period where the ultimate source of all this rebellion, Satan, is locked up and bound. And this, right here, is one of the biggest dividing lines in all of theology. Is that a literal 1,000 years? Or is it just a symbolic term for a long period of time, like the church age? The source we're examining insists it's literal, a physical 1,000-year reign on earth, and it notes that this is where it parts ways with many mainstream interpretations. And that's really the big provocative question this interpretation leaves us hanging on. If you're reading this book literally, is a 1,000-year kingdom on earth the very next thing on the prophetic calendar? It's the ultimate test of this whole interpretive framework, framing the future not as something unknown, but as the next chapter in a story that's already been written.